In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where ancient empires span thousands of worlds and species measured their existence in millennia, humanity stands as the newest player, barely 3 centuries since first contact. Most galactic powers view them as upstart children, useful for their unpredictability but hardly worth serious consideration. But when the Zephyrian Empire's most celebrated princess finds herself facing an impossible diplomatic crisis that threatens to ignite a war consuming billions of lives, she discovers that sometimes the youngest species possesses the oldest wisdom. Sometimes, what others call recklessness, history remembers as courage. This is the story of how one human diplomat's refusal to accept the impossible changed not just the fate of worlds, but the heart of an alien princess who thought she understood what strength truly meant. Welcome to a tale where humanity's greatest weapon isn't technology or military might, it's the audacious belief that any problem can be solved if you're willing to risk everything to find a solution. Ambassador Marcus Chen straightened his formal diplomatic jacket as the massive doors of the Zephyrian Imperial Palace began to open. The sound echoed through the crystalline corridors like distant thunder, each note reverberating with the weight of millennia. Behind those doors waited Princess Lyralii Zarthane, heir to an empire that spanned over 4,000 star systems and commanded the loyalty of 67 different species. Marcus had studied her file extensively during the 3-week journey from Earth. 28 years old by human standards, though her species lived for nearly 5 centuries. Brilliant military strategist who had personally led the successful defense of the Outer Rim territories against the Krillian invasion. Fluent in over 200 galactic languages and dialects. Trained in 17 different forms of diplomatic protocol. By every measure, she was perfectly prepared to rule one of the galaxy's most powerful empires. What the files didn't capture was the way she moved when the doors finally revealed the throne room. Princess Lyralii stood near a massive window that offered a breathtaking view of the capital city sprawling across 3 moons. Her species, the Zephyrians, were tall and elegant, with iridescent skin that shifted between deep purple and silver depending on the light. She wore traditional royal garments that seemed to float around her like liquid starlight, and her forearms moved with practiced grace as she gestured to her advisors. "Your Highness," Marcus said, offering the formal bow that human diplomats had adopted when dealing with Zephyrian royalty. "I am Ambassador Marcus Chen, representing the United Earth Coalition." Princess Lyralii turned, and Marcus found himself meeting eyes that held the deep blue of nebula clouds. There was intelligence there, certainly, but also something he hadn't expected from the files, a weariness that seemed far too old for someone not yet 30. "Ambassador Chen," she replied in perfect, unaccented English. "Your reputation precedes you. My advisors tell me you have solved several diplomatic crises that other ambassadors deemed impossible. I've been fortunate to find solutions where others saw only problems, Your Highness." A slight smile touched her lips. Modest. How refreshingly human. She gestured toward a circular discussion area where several other figures waited. "Please, join us. We have much to discuss, and very little time." As Marcus approached, he recognized some of the assembled beings from his briefings. General Caxthor, the 8-foot-tall granite warrior whose species served as the Empire's primary military force. Minister Veltania, a spider-like Nexari whose people handled most of the Empire's economic affairs. Dr. Zenith, a gaseous ethereal contained within a sophisticated environmental suit, representing the Empire's scientific community. "Ambassador," Princess Lyralii began once everyone was seated, "we have requested Earth's assistance because we face a crisis that threatens not just our empire, but potentially the entire galactic community." She activated a holographic display that filled the center of the circle with a 3-dimensional star map. Red zones pulsed ominously throughout what Marcus recognized as the galactic southeast quadrant. 17 days ago, the princess continued, our long-range sensors detected something unprecedented. A collection of objects, we're not even certain we can call them ships, emerged from dark space beyond the galactic rim. They're moving toward inhabited systems at impossible speeds, and they're not responding to any form of communication. General Caxthor leaned forward, his granite-like features grim. "Our initial scout fleets made contact 3 days ago. The results were devastating. These entities destroyed our ships without warning, without any attempt at communication. They consumed the wreckage and continued toward inhabited space." Marcus studied the display, noting the projected paths of the unknown objects. Consumed? Dr. Zenith's voice emanated from the speakers of his environmental suit in a series of harmonic tones. That is the only word that accurately describes their behavior, Ambassador. They appeared to break down our ships at a molecular level and incorporate the materials into their own structures. Our sensors detected no energy weapons, no projectiles. The ship simply dissolved. How many systems are in the projected path? Marcus asked. Princess Lyraliai's expression grew even more grave. 47 inhabited systems. Combined population of approximately 12 billion sentient beings across 33 different species. The weight of that number settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Marcus had dealt with diplomatic crises before, trade disputes that threatened economic collapse, territorial conflicts that could spark interstellar wars, even first contact situations with previously unknown species. But nothing had ever involved the potential extinction of billions of lives. What responses has the Empire considered? He asked. Minister Veltania's multiple eyes focused on Marcus as she spoke. Military intervention was our first consideration. However, our preliminary engagements proved ineffective. These entities appeared to adapt to our weapons in real time. Energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, even quantum disruption charges, nothing has proved effective. Evacuation? Marcus suggested. General Caxthor shook his massive head. We've begun emergency evacuations of the closest systems, but the logistics are overwhelming. 12 billion beings cannot be relocated in the 18 days we estimate before the entities reach the first inhabited world. Even with every transport ship in the Empire, we could evacuate perhaps 10% of the population. Princess Lyraliai stood and walked to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the transparent aluminum. The Galactic Council has been informed, of course. The other major powers are offering assistance, but their response times, by the time significant help arrives, millions will already be dead. Marcus rose and joined her at the window. Below them, the capital city bustled with activity, millions of beings going about their daily lives, unaware that their entire civilization might be facing extinction. Your Highness, he said quietly, forgive me for asking, but why did you request specifically for human assistance? Our technology is centuries behind yours. Our military is tiny compared to the Imperial fleet. What do you think we can offer that your own advisors cannot? Princess Lyraliai was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a note of vulnerability that Marcus hadn't heard before. Because, Ambassador, in every crisis the Zephyrian Empire has faced over the past 1,000 years, we have relied on our superior technology, our vast military, our ancient wisdom and experience. We have approached every problem as an empire that has survived for millennia by being the strongest, the smartest, the most prepared. She turned to face him directly. But humanity has something we have never possessed, the ability to find solutions that shouldn't exist. Your species has survived by being the smallest, the weakest, the most desperate. You have learned to turn disadvantages into strengths and to find victory in situations where victory should be impossible. Marcus felt the weight of her expectation, but also something else, a spark of the same defiant optimism that had driven humanity to reach for the stars despite starting with nothing but crude chemical rockets and stubborn determination. What do your military analysts project will happen if we can't find a solution? He asked. General Caxthor answered from behind them. Complete consumption of the 47 systems within 32 days. After that, if the entities continue their current behavior pattern, they will likely target the next tier of inhabited systems. Conservative estimates suggest that within one galactic year, they could consume approximately 60% of all inhabited worlds in this galaxy. The numbers were staggering, but Marcus had learned long ago that the size of a problem didn't change the fundamental approach to solving it. Every crisis, from a trade dispute between two worlds to the potential extinction of 60% of galactic civilization, came down to the same basic elements: understand the situation, identify the real problem, and find a solution that addresses the root cause rather than the symptoms. I need to see everything, he said, turning back to the assembled advisors. Every sensor reading, every tactical report, every piece of data you've collected about these entities. And I need direct access to any survivors from the initial encounters. Princess Lyraliai nodded approvingly. Already prepared, Ambassador.
We've established a complete information suite in the palace's strategic center.
You'll have access to our most advanced analysis systems and direct communication with our forward scout bases.
There's one more thing, Marcus added.
I work best when I can collaborate with local experts who understand the unique aspects of the situation. I'd like to request that you personally participate in the analysis process, Your Highness.
Several of the advisors shifted uncomfortably at this breach of protocol. Princesses of the Zephyrian Empire did not typically work directly with foreign ambassadors, especially on such a detailed level. But Princess Lyralii smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her. Ambassador, I was trained as a military strategist before I was trained as a diplomat.
I would welcome the opportunity to approach this crisis as a problem to be solved rather than a catastrophe to be managed.
Dr. Zenith's harmonious voice filled the room.
If I may, Your Highness, Ambassador Chen's reputation suggests that his methods can be unconventional.
Are you prepared for approaches that may not align with traditional imperial doctrine?
Princess Lyralii's eyes met Marcus's, and he saw something there that he recognized, the same stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had driven humanity to thrive despite every disadvantage. Doctor, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone born to command an empire, if traditional imperial doctrine could solve this crisis, we would not have requested assistance from a species that didn't even know faster than light travel was possible 3 centuries ago.
She gestured toward the door leading deeper into the palace complex. Ambassador, shall we begin?
As they walked through corridors lined with the artistic treasures of 1,000 worlds, Marcus felt the familiar mental shift that came with engaging a new challenge. The scope was unlike anything he'd faced before, but the fundamental process remained the same. Somewhere in the data they'd collected, in the patterns of behavior these entities displayed, in the details that conventional analysis had missed, there would be a solution. The strategic center turned out to be a vast chamber filled with holographic displays, quantum computers, and communication arrays that could reach any point in the Empire instantaneously. Princess Lyralii led him to a central console where the collected data about the mysterious entities was displayed in every conceivable format: tactical projections, energy readings, behavioral analyses, molecular composition studies. Begin with this, she said, activating a recording.
This is the last transmission we received from Scout Fleet Gamma before they were destroyed. The holographic display filled with the image of a Zephyrian ship's bridge.
The captain, a young officer with the distinctive silver skin markings of the Outer Rim territories, was speaking rapidly into the communication system.
Imperial Command, we've made visual contact with the entities. They're unlike anything in our databases.
Massive, but not in the conventional sense. They seem to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They're approaching our formation, but they're not responding to hails, warning shots, or any standard communication protocols. The transmission flickered, and, when it cleared, the captain's expression had changed to one of confusion and growing alarm.
Imperial Command, something's happening to our hull integrity.
No weapon signatures detected, no energy discharge, but our outer hull is dissolving.
It's like the molecules are just coming apart.
We're attempting to withdraw, but the transmission cut to static. Marcus studied the tactical data that accompanied the recording. The scout ships had been some of the Empire's most advanced vessels, equipped with shields that could withstand direct hits from stellar-class weapons. Yet they had been destroyed in less than 4 minutes without any apparent use of conventional weapons.
Show me the sensor readings from the moment of contact, he requested.
Princess Lyralii manipulated the controls, and the display filled with a complex array of energy signatures, gravitational readings, and spatial distortion measurements. To Marcus's eyes, most of it was incomprehensible, but certain patterns stood out.
The entities aren't using weapons in any sense we understand, he observed.
They're manipulating fundamental forces on a molecular level. But, look at this, he pointed to a series of energy spikes that preceded each hull failure.
There's a pattern here. They're not randomly destroying everything they encounter. They're being selective about what they consume.
Princess Lyralii leaned closer to study the data he was indicating. Marcus found himself momentarily distracted by her proximity. She smelled like starlight and ozone, if such a thing were possible. You're right, she said, her voice carrying a note of excitement. They ignored the sensor arrays, the communication equipment, even the escape pods. They specifically targeted the hull materials, the power cores, and the propulsion systems. Suggesting they need specific materials or energy sources, Marcus concluded.
This isn't random destruction. It's resource acquisition.
For the next several hours, they worked through the data together, identifying patterns that individual analyses had missed. Princess Lyralii proved to be every bit as brilliant as her reputation suggested, with an intuitive grasp of tactical thinking that complemented Marcus's more unconventional approach to problem solving. As the local day cycle moved toward evening, Marcus realized they had made significant progress in understanding what they were facing, but were still no closer to a solution. "We need to think about this differently," he said, standing and stretching muscles that had grown stiff from hours of hunching over displays. "Everything we've learned suggests these entities are resource gatherers, not conquerors. They're not trying to destroy civilization, they just need materials that happen to be components of our ships and infrastructure."
Princess Lyralii nodded thoughtfully. "But that doesn't help us protect the inhabited systems. Even if their intent isn't malicious, the result is the same: billions of deaths." Marcus walked to one of the large windows that offered a view of the 3 moons hosting the capital city. In the distance, he could see the lights of spacecraft moving between the moons, the steady flow of commerce and communication that kept an interstellar empire functioning. "What if we're approaching this backwards?" he said suddenly. "What do you mean?"
Marcus turned back to face her, his mind racing as connections formed between seemingly disparate pieces of information. "Everyone, your military, your advisors, even the Galactic Council, is thinking about this as a problem of how to stop the entities.
But what if the real problem is how to give them what they need without letting them take it from inhabited systems?"
Princess Lyralii's eyes widened as she grasped the implications.
"You're suggesting we feed them?" "I'm suggesting we negotiate with them.
Not through language, they may not communicate the way we understand communication.
But through actions.
Through offering them what they need in a way that doesn't require them to consume inhabited worlds." It was a radical concept, one that flew in the face of every military instinct that said unknown threats should be met with force. But, as Marcus watched Princess Lyralii consider the idea, he saw the moment when she made the same logical leap he had. "It could work," she said slowly. "If we can determine what specific materials they need and provide those materials in sufficient quantities. We could redirect them away from inhabited space entirely," Marcus finished. Princess Lyralii activated the communication system to contact her advisors. "General Caxthor, Minister Veltania, Dr. Zenith, please report to the Strategic Center immediately.
Ambassador Chen has proposed a solution that may save the 47 systems."
As they waited for the others to arrive, Marcus found himself studying Princess Lyralii with new appreciation. She had grasped not just the tactical implications of his suggestion, but the fundamental shift in thinking it required. Instead of viewing the entities as enemies to be defeated, she was already beginning to see them as a problem to be solved.
"Your Highness," he said quietly, "has anyone ever told you that you have a remarkable ability to see past conventional wisdom?"
She smiled, and this time the expression reached her eyes.
"Ambassador, has anyone ever told you that you have a remarkable talent for seeing solutions where everyone else sees only impossibility?"
When the advisors arrived, Marcus and Princess Lyralii presented their analysis and their proposed solution. The reaction was exactly what Marcus had expected: shock, skepticism, and immediate objections about the impossibility of communicating with entities that had shown no response to conventional contact attempts. But, as they worked through the logistics, as they examined the feasibility of gathering the necessary materials and delivering them to locations that would attract the entities away from inhabited space, the plan began to take shape. By the time the local night cycle reached its deepest point, they had outlined a strategy that was audacious, risky, and completely dependent on assumptions that couldn't be verified until they attempted to implement it. It was, in other words, exactly the kind of plan that humans had been using to survive impossible situations since the first primitive ancestors had decided to leave the safety of the trees and walk upright across dangerous savannas. Princess Lyralii stood at the great window, looking out at her empire and the billions of lives that hung in the balance. "Ambassador," she said without turning around, "your plan requires us to bet everything on the assumption that these entities will respond to an offer of cooperation rather than simply consuming whatever we put in front of them along with everything else."
"Yes, Your Highness."
It requires us to mobilize resources on a scale that has never been attempted in galactic history.
Yes.
And it requires us to trust that a species we don't understand, can't communicate with, and have never successfully negotiated with will somehow recognize our intentions and modify their behavior accordingly. Marcus joined her at the window.
Yes. It requires all of those things.
Princess Lyralii turned to face him, and, in her expression, Marcus saw something that surprised him, not just determination, but genuine excitement at the audacious scope of what they were proposing.
Then, we begin tomorrow, she said. Ambassador, I do believe you may be the first human I've met who thinks on a scale that matches the problems we're trying to solve.
As Marcus prepared to return to his quarters for a few hours of rest before beginning what might be the most ambitious diplomatic initiative in galactic history, he reflected on the day's revelations. He had come to the Zephyrian Empire expecting to work with a proud, ancient civilization that would require careful handling of their dignity and traditions. Instead, he had found a princess who was willing to bet her empire on an untested theory proposed by a representative of the galaxy's youngest spacefaring species. She had moved past centuries of imperial doctrine to embrace a solution that required trusting in cooperation rather than relying on superior force. Tomorrow, they would begin implementing a plan that would either save billions of lives or represent the most spectacular diplomatic failure in recorded history. Marcus had faced impossible odds before, but never quite like this. The next morning brought a frenzy of activity that transformed the normally stately pace of imperial governance into something resembling a barely controlled whirlwind. Princess Lyralii had called an emergency session of the Imperial Council, summoning representatives from every major world and species within the Empire to coordinate the largest resource mobilization in galactic history. Marcus found himself standing before a circular assembly hall that could comfortably seat 3,000 beings, watching as delegates filed in from across the galaxy. The diversity was staggering: crystalline beings from the silicon worlds whose thoughts moved like geological processes, gaseous entities from the nebula colonies who communicated through complex chemical exchanges, mechanical intelligences whose bodies were works of art that happened to be sentient. Each species brought their own perspectives, capabilities, and limitations to the unprecedented challenge they faced. Princess Lyralii stood at the center podium, wearing formal robes of state that seemed to capture and reflect the light from a dozen different stars. Her forearms moved in precise gestures as she activated the massive holographic display that dominated the center of the chamber. Honored delegates, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's advanced acoustics, we face a crisis that transcends the normal boundaries of politics, territory, and species loyalty. What threatens one of us threatens all of us, and what saves one of us saves all of us. The holographic display showed the updated projection of the entity's path through inhabited space. The red zones had expanded since yesterday's briefings, indicating that the mysterious objects were accelerating and, potentially, multiplying. Our analysis, conducted in collaboration with Ambassador Chen of the United Earth Coalition, has led us to a revolutionary approach to this crisis. Rather than attempting to destroy these entities, we propose to redirect them by providing what they appear to need: specific materials and energy sources that they can acquire without consuming inhabited worlds. A murmur ran through the assembly as the implications of this statement registered. Senator Vex Laura of the Crystalline Conclave was the first to voice what many were thinking. Your Highness, her words chimed like struck crystal, you propose to feed these entities that have already destroyed our scout fleets? How can we trust beings that have shown no interest in communication or negotiation? Marcus stepped forward to the secondary podium that had been prepared for him. The sight of a human addressing the Imperial Council would have been remarkable under normal circumstances. Humans had been granted observer status in galactic politics only 2 decades ago. Today, it barely registered as unusual given the magnitude of what they were proposing. Senator Vex Laura raises a valid concern, Marcus said. But, consider this, every action these entities have taken shows clear pattern recognition and resource optimization. They don't destroy randomly. They don't consume everything they encounter. They specifically target materials and energy sources that meet their apparent needs. He gestured toward the holographic display, which shifted to show the detailed analysis he and Princess Lyralii had compiled the previous night. This suggests intelligence, but not necessarily intelligence that communicates through language or conventional signals. Think of it as ecological rather than diplomatic. A predator doesn't negotiate with its prey, but it can be redirected by offering more accessible alternatives.
Admiral Frendar of the Void Corsairs, a species known for their aggressive approach to problem solving, leaned forward in his seat.
Ambassador, even if your theory is correct, the logistics of what you're proposing are staggering. The quantities of materials required would strip entire star systems of their resources.
Princess Lyralii activated another section of the display, showing detailed resource calculations that represented hours of work by the Empire's finest logistical analysts.
Admiral, you're correct about the scale.
But consider what we're already losing.
The 47 systems in the entity's projected path contain industrial infrastructure worth approximately 40,000 stellar standard resource units.
The cost of relocating those populations, even if it were possible, would consume nearly half the Empire's annual economic output.
She gestured to a new series of projections. Our proposed solution would require approximately 8,000 stellar standard resource units, sourced from uninhabited systems and volunteer worlds throughout the galaxy. The materials can be gathered without displacing populations or damaging existing infrastructure. Minister Kolveth of the Trade Coalition spoke up, his electronic voice synthesized through his species' mechanical translation matrix. Your Highness, you're asking every member world to contribute resources to an untested theory. What guarantee do we have that these entities won't simply consume whatever we provide and, then, continue to consume inhabited worlds as well? Marcus had anticipated this question. It was the fundamental weakness of their plan. They were betting everything on an assumption that couldn't be verified until they attempted to implement it. Minister Kolveth, he said, there is no guarantee.
But, let me offer you a different perspective on risk assessment.
If we do nothing, we know with absolute certainty that billions will die within the next 30 days. If we mobilize military forces for a conventional response, our preliminary engagement results suggest we'll slow the entities down while losing most of our fleet capabilities, ultimately leading to the same result, but with the added cost of our military resources. He paused, letting the mathematics of desperation settle over the assembly.
Our proposed solution offers the first alternative that doesn't end in certain catastrophe.
Yes, it requires unprecedented cooperation and resource commitment. Yes, it's based on untested theories about entities we don't fully understand. But it's the only plan anyone has developed that offers a genuine possibility of saving those 47 systems.
Dr. Zenith's harmonic voice filled the chamber as he addressed the assembly from his environmental containment unit.
If I may add a scientific perspective to Ambassador Chen's analysis, our studies of the entity's behavior patterns show remarkable consistency. They have encountered 17 different types of stellar phenomena, 43 varieties of planetary formation, and dozens of different ship configurations. In every case, they have demonstrated selective consumption patterns that prioritize specific materials over others. The holographic display shifted to show Dr. Zenith's detailed molecular analysis of the entity's apparent preferences. Based on their observed behavior, they appear to require heavy metals, particularly those used in advanced propulsion systems, along with specific crystalline matrices typically found in energy storage systems. These materials exist in abundance in uninhabited asteroid fields and dead star systems throughout this region of the galaxy. Senator Morgeth of the Hive Worlds, whose species thought in terms of collective consciousness rather than individual decision-making, spoke for the first time since the assembly began. The pattern analysis suggests predictable behavior. If the entities can be redirected to locations where these materials are abundant and easily accessible, the probability of success approaches 67%. For the Hive Worlds, this represents acceptable risk parameters. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude toward the senator. The Hive Worlds carried enormous influence in the Imperial Council due to their reputation for mathematical precision in risk assessment. Their support could sway other delegates who were still uncertain about the plan.
Princess Lyralii seemed to sense the shift in the assembly's mood.
Honored delegates, I'm not asking you to approve this plan based on faith or hope. I'm asking you to approve it based on mathematics. We have 18 days before the entities reach the first inhabited system. Every conventional approach we've analyzed leads to catastrophic failure. This approach offers a genuine possibility of success. She gestured toward the resource projections still displayed in the chamber's center. The materials we need can be gathered and positioned within 15 days if we begin immediately. Every member world would contribute according to their capabilities, some providing raw materials, others offering transportation, others contributing manufacturing capabilities or scientific expertise.
Admiral Frendar stood from his seat, his massive frame imposing even in the vast assembly hall. Your Highness, the Void Corsairs pledge our entire merchant fleet to this endeavor. We may prefer direct action to diplomatic solutions, but we recognize mathematics when we see it. The endorsement from the Void Corsairs seemed to break whatever remaining resistance existed in the assembly.
One by one, delegates rose to pledge their world's resources to the unprecedented effort. The crystalline beings offered their advanced material processing capabilities. The mechanical intelligences contributed their manufacturing systems. The gaseous entities volunteered to provide specialized transportation for materials that required environmental controls. Within 2 hours, Princess Lyralii had secured commitments for every component of their plan except one. Someone had to actually deliver the materials to locations where the entities would encounter them instead of continuing toward inhabited space. Your Highness, Marcus said during a brief recess in the proceedings, there's one element we haven't fully addressed.
Whoever delivers these materials will be in direct proximity to the entities when they arrive. Given what happened to the scout fleets. Princess Lyralii nodded grimly. I know. It's essentially a suicide mission.
We'll need volunteers who understand that they may not return. I'll lead the delivery mission. The words came out of Marcus's mouth before he'd fully realized he was going to say them.
Princess Lyralii turned to stare at him in shock. Ambassador, that's completely unacceptable.
You're not a military officer, you have no training in deep space operations, and I'm the one who designed this plan, Marcus interrupted gently. If it fails, if these entities don't respond the way we're predicting, I need to be there to observe their behavior and adapt our approach in real time. Princess Lyralii was quiet for a long moment, studying his face with an intensity that made Marcus feel as though she was reading his very thoughts. There's more to it than that, she said finally. You feel responsible for betting billions of lives on this theory.
Marcus nodded.
Someone has to take responsibility for the outcomes of their decisions, Your Highness. If I'm wrong about the entities, I'd rather be wrong in person than wrong from the safety of a command center billions of miles away.
Then, you're not going alone.
Now it was Marcus's turn to stare in shock as Princess Lyralii's meaning became clear.
Your Highness, you can't be serious. You're the heir to the Empire.
Your people need you alive and safe, not risking your life on a desperate gambit in deep space. Princess Lyralii's smile carried a hint of the same stubborn determination that Marcus was beginning to recognize as her defining characteristic.
Ambassador, my people need me to take responsibility for the decisions I make in their name. This plan was developed through our collaboration. If it succeeds, we succeed together. If it fails,
she shrugged with elegant resignation. If it fails, we'll have the satisfaction of knowing we tried something worthy of the risk. Before Marcus could object further, she had returned to the main podium to address the reassembled delegates. Honored representatives, Ambassador Chen and I will personally lead the delivery mission to ensure proper implementation of our strategy. We'll be accompanied by volunteer crews from any member worlds willing to participate in this final phase. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every delegation in the assembly volunteered personnel for what everyone understood was likely a one-way mission. Princess Lyralii had to establish selection criteria just to keep the volunteer force manageable. Over the following hours, they finalized the operational details. The material gathering would begin immediately, with cargo ships from across the galaxy converging on designated collection points. Advanced manufacturing stations would work around the clock to process raw materials into the specific configurations that analysis suggested the entities preferred. Dr. Zenith would coordinate the scientific aspects of the operation from the Imperial Research Station at Kepler 7. General Caxthor would manage the military logistics from Imperial Command.
Minister Veltania would oversee the economic coordination required to fund the largest cooperative venture in galactic history.
As the assembly session finally concluded and delegates dispersed to begin implementing their assigned responsibilities, Marcus found himself walking through the palace gardens with Princess Lyralii. The carefully cultivated plants from dozens of different worlds created a landscape that was both alien and beautiful, a living testament to the diversity that the Empire protected. "Ambassador," Princess Lyralii said as they paused beside a fountain whose water seemed to flow upward in gravity-defying spirals, "may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Your Highness." "What drives humans to take risks like this?" "Your species has a reputation throughout the galaxy for attempting solutions that other species would never consider, for surviving situations that should result in extinction." Marcus considered the question carefully. It was something he'd been asked before, usually by representatives of older, more established civilizations who couldn't understand humanity's apparent disregard for impossible odds. "I think," he said slowly, "it comes from being the newest species in a galaxy full of civilizations that are thousands of years older and more advanced than us. We can't compete with your technology, your resources, your accumulated wisdom and experience. But we can compete with our willingness to try things that established wisdom says shouldn't work." Princess Lyralii nodded thoughtfully. "And is that what you're doing now? Trying something that shouldn't work because it's the only option left?" "Partially," Marcus admitted. "But there's something else. Humans have a concept we call paying it forward. When someone helps you, you help someone else in return rather than trying to repay the original person. The galactic community welcomed humanity despite our primitive technology and limited resources. This is our chance to pay that forward." They walked in companionable silence for several minutes before Princess Lyralii spoke again. "Marcus," she said, using his first name for the first time, "I want you to know that regardless of what happens during our mission, working with you has changed how I think about leadership and problem solving. You've shown me that sometimes the most important thing a leader can do is admit they don't have all the answers and, then, trust others to help find solutions." Marcus felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the carefully controlled climate of the garden. "Lyralii, you've shown me that true leadership means being willing to bet everything on doing what's right rather than doing what's safe." As they returned to the palace to oversee the final preparations for what might be the most important mission in galactic history, Marcus reflected on how much had changed in just 2 days. He had arrived expecting to participate in conventional diplomacy with an ancient empire. Instead, he had found himself collaborating with a princess who was willing to risk her life implementing a plan that redefined what interstellar cooperation could accomplish. Tomorrow, they would depart for the edge of known space to attempt something that had never been tried before: diplomatic contact with entities that didn't communicate through language, negotiation with beings who responded only to actions, and cooperation offered to strangers who might consume everything they were offered and, then, continue destroying inhabited worlds. The odds of success were mathematically uncertain, but the alternatives were mathematically certain to result in catastrophe. For a species that had survived by taking impossible odds and turning them into unlikely victories, it was exactly the kind of challenge that felt like coming home. The massive cargo convoy stretched across several light minutes of space, a testament to the unprecedented cooperation that had emerged from desperate necessity. Marcus stood on the bridge of the flagship vessel Diplomatic Resolution, watching through the viewports as hundreds of ships from dozens of different worlds maneuvered in perfect formation despite representing completely different technological approaches to space travel. Crystalline ships that looked like living gems rotated slowly to catch optimal angles of stellar radiation. Mechanical vessels whose surfaces shifted and reconfigured constantly as their AI pilots optimized for efficiency. Organic ships grown rather than built by species that treated technology as a form of symbiotic evolution. And, scattered throughout the convoy, the practical, unadorned vessels of humanity, ships that prioritized function over aesthetics but could be repaired with salvaged materials and determination when everything else failed. Princess Lyralii stood beside him at the command station, reviewing the final positioning calculations that would determine whether their unprecedented gamble succeeded or failed catastrophically. She wore a practical jumpsuit designed for extended space operations rather than her royal garments, but somehow still managed to project an aura of natural authority that made it clear she belonged in command. "Final confirmation from Dr. Zenitha's research station," she reported, studying the data streams flowing across her personal display. "The entity's trajectory confirms our projections. They'll encounter our material deposits in approximately 14 hours. Marcus nodded, though his attention was split between the tactical situation and his growing awareness of how Princess Lyralii moved and spoke when she was focused on complex problems. Over the past week of intensive preparation, he had watched her coordinate logistics on a galactic scale, manage competing interests from dozens of species, and maintain diplomatic relationships while preparing for what might be her final mission. What struck him most was her absolute lack of doubt once she committed to a course of action. Human diplomats were trained to always maintain multiple options, to hedge their commitments in case circumstances changed. But Princess Lyralii approached leadership with the confidence of someone who made decisions based on the best available information and, then, committed completely to those decisions. "Marcus," she said, pulling his attention back to the immediate situation, "I've been thinking about our positioning strategy. If these entities respond to our material deposits the way we're hoping, we need to be close enough to observe their behavior and confirm the success of our approach. But, if they don't respond as expected, we need to be close enough to adapt our strategy in real time, even if it puts us in immediate danger," Marcus finished.
"I've been thinking the same thing."
Admiral Kasvara of the Deep Rangers, the volunteer who had taken command of the convoy's tactical operations, turned from her station to address them. Her species, the Nexari, resembled large spiders but thought in terms of complex multi-dimensional strategies that made them exceptional space tacticians. "Your Highness, Ambassador," she said, her translated voice carrying the clicking undertones that indicated serious concern, "our current formation places the command vessels at minimum safe distance from the projected contact zone. If the entities prove hostile or if they continue their consumption behavior despite the material deposits, we'll have approximately 4 minutes to withdraw beyond their apparent operational range." Marcus studied the tactical display showing their convoy's position relative to the carefully placed material deposits. The deposits themselves represented a staggering concentration of resources, refined metals, crystal and energy matrices, and processed materials that would normally supply the construction needs of an entire star system for decades. All of it was about to be offered as a meal to entities that no one truly understood, in the hope that feeding them would save billions of lives in 43 star systems. "Admiral," Princess Lyralii said, "move the command vessels to half that distance."
Both Admiral Kasvara and Marcus turned to stare at her in shock.
"Your Highness," the Admiral protested, "that would reduce our withdrawal time to less than 2 minutes. If the entities prove hostile, then, we'll have 2 minutes to determine whether our alternative strategies might work," Princess Lyralii replied calmly. "Admiral, this entire mission depends on our ability to observe and respond to the entity's behavior in real time.
We can't do that effectively from a safe distance." Marcus felt a familiar surge of admiration mixed with concern. Princess Lyralii's tactical instincts were absolutely correct, they needed to be close enough to gather meaningful data about the entity's response to their offerings.
But, the risk. "There's another factor to consider," he said thoughtfully. "If these entities are as intelligent as their behavior patterns suggest, they may interpret our distance as either fear or deception. Moving closer could be seen as a demonstration of genuine intent to cooperate rather than simply attempting to distract them."
Admiral Kasvara's multiple eyes focused on Marcus with what he had learned to recognize as the Nexari expression for grudging respect.
"Ambassador, you're suggesting that diplomatic positioning applies even to entities that don't communicate through conventional methods. I'm suggesting that any intelligence capable of the technological manipulation we've observed probably understands the relationship between positioning and intent," Marcus replied.
"If we're trying to establish cooperation, we need to demonstrate trust." Princess Lyralii activated the convoy-wide communication system. "All vessels, this is Princess Lyralii. We're adjusting our formation to optimize data gathering capabilities. Command vessels will advance to contact -2 minutes positioning."
Volunteer crews confirmed for all command positions. The response from the convoy was immediate and unanimous. Every ship in the formation acknowledged the order and began adjusting their positions without a single objection or request for clarification. Marcus realized that somewhere during the week of preparation and the 3 days of travel to reach this position, Princess Lyralii had earned the kind of trust from her diverse crews that human commanders could spend years trying to build. As the convoy moved into its final formation, Marcus found himself standing closer to Princess Lyralii at the command station. The bridge lighting had been dimmed to optimize the viewports for visual contact with the entities when they arrived, and, in the reduced illumination, he could see the faint patterns of bioluminescence that all Zephyrians possessed but that usually weren't visible under normal lighting. "Nervous?" she asked quietly, her voice pitched so only he could hear.
Terrified, Marcus admitted with a slight smile. But, it's the productive kind of terror, the kind that makes you pay attention to details you might otherwise miss. Princess Lyralii laughed softly, a sound that carried musical overtones unique to her species. I was hoping I wasn't the only one. I've led military campaigns against hostile fleets, negotiated territorial disputes that could have sparked interstellar wars, even survived a diplomatic dinner with the Crystalline Conclave's entire leadership council. But, I've never attempted anything quite like this. Well, Marcus said, if we succeed, it'll make for an interesting chapter in both of our memoirs. If we fail, at least we'll fail attempting something worthy of the risk. Their conversation was interrupted by a series of alerts from the sensor stations around the bridge. Admiral Caspara's voice carried a note of tension that made everyone on the bridge immediately alert. Contact. Multiple objects approaching from dark space, vector consistent with projected approach patterns. Distance, approximately 1 light-hour and, closing fast. The main display filled with sensor readings that showed a cluster of objects moving toward their position at speeds that violated several supposedly fundamental principles of physics. As the objects drew closer and the sensors gathered more detailed information, the true scope of what they were facing became clear. Admiral, one of the sensor technicians reported, her voice filled with awe, preliminary analysis suggests the entities aren't single objects. They're constructs. Complex assemblies of smaller units operating in perfect coordination. Marcus studied the display as more information became available. The entities were massive, certainly, but their structure defied easy categorization. They seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that conventional sensors could only detect indirectly. They're beautiful, Princess Lyralii said quietly, and Marcus realized she was right. Whatever these entities were, they moved with a fluid grace that suggested design principles far beyond anything achieved by the known galactic civilizations. Contact -30 minutes, Admiral Caspara reported. All vessels report ready status. Material deposits are in position and broadcasting the attraction signals designed by Dr. Zenitha's research team. Marcus activated his personal communication link to address the entire convoy. As the person who had developed the theoretical foundation for their approach, he felt responsible for ensuring that everyone understood what they were attempting and why. All vessels, this is Ambassador Chen. In approximately 30 minutes, we'll learn whether our analysis of these entities has been correct. If it has, we'll have achieved something unprecedented in galactic history, peaceful contact and cooperation with an intelligence completely unlike anything we've encountered before. He paused, looking around the bridge at the diverse crew of volunteers who had risked everything to implement a plan based on untested theories about incomprehensible entities. If our analysis proves incorrect, I want every person participating in this mission to know that you've been part of the most ambitious cooperative effort in the history of interstellar civilization. Win or lose, what we've accomplished over the past week has demonstrated that when faced with extinction-level threats, every species in this galaxy can work together toward solutions that none of us could achieve individually. Princess Lyralii activated her own communication link to add her perspective. Additionally, I want everyone to know that regardless of the outcome, this mission has redefined what leadership means in the modern galactic community. Today, we lead not by commanding others to take risks we're unwilling to take ourselves, but by standing together at the moment of greatest danger and greatest opportunity. As the entities drew closer, their structure became more clearly defined on the sensors. They moved in formations that suggested individual units coordinating as part of a larger intelligence, but the formations themselves were unlike anything in any military database. Contact -10 minutes, Admiral Caspara reported. Entities are reducing speed and beginning to alter course. They're heading for the material deposits. Marcus felt a surge of hope mixed with terror as the entities began to respond exactly as their analysis had predicted. But the real test would come when the entities reached the deposits and decided whether to consume the offered materials and withdraw, or to consume the materials and continue toward inhabited space. All vessels, maintain position and passive sensor operations only, Princess Lyralii commanded. No active scans, no movement, no communication attempts until we determine their response pattern. The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of life support systems and the occasional status update from the sensor stations.
Through the viewports, Marcus could see the distant glow of the material deposits as the entities approached them. And then, in a display that was visible to the naked eye across several light minutes of space, the entities reached the first deposit. What happened next would be discussed in diplomatic and military academies for centuries to come. The entities didn't simply consume the materials they had been offered. Instead, they began to interact with the deposits in ways that suggested analysis, consideration, even something resembling appreciation. The massive constructs moved through the deposits with careful precision, taking specific materials while leaving others untouched. They seemed to be testing the quality and composition of what they had been offered, and their behavior suggested they recognized that the materials had been deliberately provided rather than simply encountered. "They're being selective," Admiral Kasvara reported with wonder in her voice. "They're taking approximately 30% of each deposit but leaving the rest untouched. That pattern, it's like they're accepting a gift rather than simply feeding." Marcus felt something in his chest that took him a moment to identify as tears. Their gamble had worked. The entities were responding to an offer of cooperation, demonstrating intelligence and restraint that proved they could distinguish between deliberate offerings and random resources. But the true test was still to come. After consuming their carefully calculated portions from each deposit, would the entities withdraw toward dark space, or would they continue toward inhabited systems? For nearly an hour, the entities moved through the deposits they had been offered, consistently taking portions while leaving the remainder untouched. Their behavior was methodical, careful, and showed clear evidence of planning and restraint. Finally, having completed their interaction with the deposits, the entities began to move again. They turned away from inhabited space and began accelerating back toward the dark regions beyond the galactic rim. Princess Lyraliai's voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the emotion beneath her formal tone as she addressed the convoy. "All vessels, this is Princess Lyraliai. Mission successful. The entities have withdrawn toward dark space. 43 star systems and 12 billion sentient beings are no longer in immediate danger." The celebration that erupted across the convoy communication channels was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard. Voices in dozens of languages, representing species that had never cooperated on this scale before, joined in expressing joy, relief, and amazement at what they had accomplished together. But, as Marcus watched the entities disappear toward the edge of sensor range, he realized that they had achieved something even more significant than saving 43 star systems. They had proved that intelligence, regardless of its form, could recognize and respond to genuine offers of cooperation. Princess Lyraliai moved to stand beside him at the viewport, following his gaze toward the now empty space where the entities had been. "Marcus," she said quietly, "what we've done here today will change how the galaxy approaches contact with unknown intelligences for centuries to come." "Lyraliai," he replied, "what we've done here today has changed me." She turned to look at him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. "How so?" Marcus struggled to find words for the realization that had been building throughout the mission. "Working with you, seeing how you lead by trusting others to contribute their best capabilities rather than trying to control every detail, it's made me understand that true cooperation requires being willing to be changed by the people you work with." Princess Lyraliai smiled, and this time the expression carried something warmer than mere professional satisfaction. "Ambassador Marcus Chen," she said, using his full formal title with gentle irony, "you've managed to save billions of lives, establish a new model for interstellar cooperation, and demonstrate successful diplomatic contact with entities that don't communicate through language. And somehow you still managed to surprise me." As the convoy began the journey back toward Imperial space, Marcus reflected on everything that had changed over the past 10 days. He had arrived as a human ambassador attempting to assist with a crisis facing the Zephyrian Empire. But, somewhere along the way, the mission had become something more personal, a collaboration between two people who had discovered they could trust each other with impossible decisions and unprecedented risks. The entities were gone, the inhabited systems were safe, and the galaxy had proven that cooperation could overcome even extinction-level threats when beings were willing to risk everything for the survival of strangers. But Marcus suspected that the most significant changes were only beginning. The victory celebration in the Imperial Palace lasted 3 days and drew representatives from civilizations that hadn't spoken to each other in centuries. The Great Assembly Hall had been transformed into a living monument to galactic cooperation, with artistic displays from every participating world arranged in patterns that told the story of their unprecedented collaboration. Marcus found himself moving through crowds of beings who treated him as something between a celebrity and a miracle worker. Delegates who had never spoken to a human before approached him to discuss the theoretical implications of diplomatic contact with non-linguistic intelligences. Military commanders wanted to understand how his analysis had identified behavioral patterns that conventional tactical assessment had missed. But what struck him most was how Princess Lyralii moved through the same crowds. She was the heir to the empire, the person whose leadership had made their success possible, yet she consistently directed credit toward the collaborative nature of their achievement. She spoke of the mission as proof of what the galactic community could accomplish when every participant contributed their unique capabilities toward a shared goal. Ambassador Chen, she said during a brief moment when they found themselves together near one of the viewing platforms overlooking the celebration, I've been watching you interact with our guests. You seem almost uncomfortable with the attention. Marcus smiled ruefully. Humans have a cultural concept called imposter syndrome, the feeling that any success you achieve is due to luck or circumstances rather than your own capabilities. I keep thinking that any competent diplomat would have reached the same conclusions we did. Princess Lyralii studied him with the same intensity she had brought to analyzing the entity's behavioral patterns. You're wrong about that, you know. I've reviewed the preliminary reports from other diplomatic teams that analyzed the entity crisis. None of them suggested resource offering as a solution. Most recommended evacuation strategies or military containment approaches. She gestured toward the celebration continuing below them. What we did, required a fundamental shift in how we think about contact with unknown intelligences. That's not luck or circumstances. That's innovation. Marcus was about to respond when Admiral Kasvara approached them, moving with the careful precision that indicated she had important information to share. Your Highness, Ambassador, she said, her translated voice carrying undertones of excitement, Dr. Zenith has completed his analysis of the sensor data from the entity encounter. The results are remarkable. Princess Lyralii immediately shifted into her command mode, the casual conversation replaced by focused attention. Show us. Admiral Kasvara activated a portable holographic display that projected a detailed three-dimensional model of the entity's behavior during their interaction with the material deposits. The entities didn't simply consume random portions of what we offered, she explained. They systematically analyzed the composition of each deposit and selected materials based on criteria that appear to be optimization for specific construction purposes. The holographic display shifted to show molecular-level analysis of what the entities had taken and what they had left behind. Even more significantly, Admiral Kasvara continued, the materials they selected were exactly what would be required to construct the type of propulsion systems they use. Dr. Zenith believes they were gathering components for repairs or expansion of their fleet capabilities. Marcus felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. They weren't randomly destroying our scout ships. They were harvesting materials for specific technological needs. When we offered those same materials in concentrated, easily accessible form, we eliminated their need to extract materials from our ships and infrastructure, Princess Lyralii finished. They were never hostile. They were just resourceful. Admiral Kasvara's multiple eyes focused on both of them with what Marcus had learned to recognize as the Nexary expression for profound respect. There's more, she said. Dr. Zenith's analysis suggests that the entity's construction technology is thousands of years more advanced than anything in our databases. If we could establish genuine communication with them. The implications hung in the air between them like a promise and a challenge. Contact with a civilization possessing technology thousands of years more advanced than their own could revolutionize galactic society, but it would require moving far beyond the resource-offering approach they had used to redirect the entities. Has Dr. Zenith made any progress toward developing actual communication protocols? Princess Lyralii asked. He's developing several theoretical approaches based on the patterns we observed during their material selection process, Admiral Kasvara replied. But testing any of them would require another direct contact mission. Marcus found himself studying the holographic display with growing excitement.
The entity's systematic approach to material selection suggested they used logical processes that might be translatable into communication frameworks. If they could develop a system for exchanging information rather than just offering resources. Your Highness, he said slowly, what if this isn't the end of the crisis, but the beginning of the opportunity? Princess Lyralii turned to look at him with an expression that suggested she was following the same line of thinking. You're suggesting we attempt to establish ongoing contact rather than simply ensuring they avoid inhabited space. I'm suggesting that we've proved cooperative contact is possible with intelligences that operate completely differently from any known galactic civilization. The question now is whether we're willing to take the next step toward genuine communication and potential cooperation. Admiral Kasvara made a sound that her translation matrix rendered as surprised approval. Ambassador, you're proposing to establish diplomatic relations with entities whose technology could advance galactic civilization by millennia. Marcus nodded, though he was already thinking through the complex challenges such an undertaking would involve. But it would require even more unprecedented cooperation than our rescue mission. We'd need to develop communication methodologies that don't rely on language, establish protocols for technology transfer that don't destabilize existing civilizations, and create frameworks for cooperation with beings whose thought processes may be fundamentally different from anything we understand. Princess Lyralii was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the celebration below where representatives from dozens of civilizations continued to marvel at what they had accomplished together. Marcus, she said finally, do you realize what you're suggesting? A long-term diplomatic initiative that could span decades, requiring sustained cooperation from civilizations that have barely managed to work together for 2 weeks? Yes, Marcus replied simply. And, do you realize that you've already proved such cooperation is possible when the stakes are high enough? Princess Lyralii smiled, and Marcus realized that her expression carried the same mix of excitement and determination that he was feeling. Admiral Kasvara, she said, please convey our compliments to Dr. Zenith and request that he prepare a comprehensive analysis of communication possibilities. Include resource requirements, timeline estimates, and recommended approaches for expanding the current cooperative framework to support long-term contact efforts. Your Highness, Admiral Kasvara said, are you planning to propose this to the Imperial Council? I'm planning to propose it to the same Galactic Assembly that supported our rescue mission, Princess Lyralii replied. If we're going to attempt something this ambitious, it should be as a galactic community rather than as individual empires or species. Over the following days, as the celebration continued and delegates began preparing to return to their home worlds, Marcus and Princess Lyralii worked together to develop a preliminary framework for what they were calling the Long-Term Contact Initiative. The more they analyzed the possibilities, the more complex and exciting the project became. The entity's technology could potentially solve resource scarcity issues that had plagued galactic civilization for centuries. Their approach to space travel could open up regions of the galaxy that were currently inaccessible. Their construction techniques could enable infrastructure projects that were currently impossible even to imagine. But, beyond the technological possibilities, Marcus realized that the project represented something even more significant, proof that cooperation between completely different forms of intelligence was not just possible, but potentially beneficial to everyone involved. Lyralii, he said during one of their evening planning sessions in the palace's strategy center, I need to tell you something that's been on my mind since we returned from the contact mission. She looked up from the resource projections they had been reviewing, giving him her complete attention with the focus that had impressed him from their first meeting. Working with you on this project has been the most intellectually challenging and personally rewarding experience of my diplomatic career, Marcus continued. You've changed how I think about leadership, cooperation, and what's possible when people are willing to trust each other with impossible decisions. Princess Lyralii set aside her work and moved to stand beside him at the window overlooking the palace gardens. The 3 moons were visible in the night sky, their surfaces glowing with the lights of the cities that housed billions of beings whose lives they had helped save. Marcus, she said quietly, you've changed how I think about innovation, risk assessment, and the value of perspectives that challenge conventional wisdom. Before we worked together, I approached problems by applying superior resources and established protocols. You've taught me to approach problems by questioning fundamental assumptions and finding solutions that shouldn't exist. They stood together in comfortable silence for several minutes, both of them aware that they were discussing something more significant than professional collaboration. There's something else, Princess Lyralii said finally. If we proceed with the long-term contact initiative, it will require years of sustained effort. I'll need a diplomatic partner who understands both the technical challenges and the broader implications of what we're attempting. Marcus felt his heart rate increase as he grasped the implications of her statement. Your Highness, are you offering me a permanent position as a diplomatic liaison to the Zephyrian Empire? Princess Lyralii turned to face him directly, and her expression carried a warmth that went well beyond professional respect. Marcus, I'm offering you a partnership in the most ambitious diplomatic project in galactic history. But, I'm also telling you that I've come to value your friendship more than any professional achievement we might accomplish together. Marcus realized that somewhere during their impossible mission to save 43 star systems, his feelings toward Princess Lyralii had evolved far beyond professional admiration. Her intelligence, her courage, her willingness to risk everything for the sake of strangers, he had fallen in love with her without fully realizing it was happening. Lyralii, he said, using her personal name with a deliberate intimacy that acknowledged what they were both feeling, I would be honored to accept both partnerships. Princess Lyralii's smile was radiant as she moved closer to him, close enough that he could see the subtle patterns of bioluminescence that played across her skin when she was happy. Then, perhaps, she said softly, we should discuss the personal aspects of our partnership as well as the professional ones. The kiss that followed was gentle, tentative, and carried the wonder of two beings from completely different species discovering that emotional connection transcended the boundaries of biology and culture. When they finally separated, Marcus realized that their relationship had added yet another unprecedented dimension to what they were attempting to achieve. You know, he said with a slightly shaky laugh, if we proceed with both the diplomatic initiative and the personal relationship, we'll be establishing new models for interspecies cooperation on every possible level. Princess Lyralii laughed as well, the musical sound filling the strategy center with joy. Marcus, if our mission taught me anything, it's that the most worthwhile achievements come from attempting things that have never been done before. As they returned to their planning session, now working as partners in every sense of the word, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since accepting the assignment to assist with a diplomatic crisis in the Zephyrian Empire. He had arrived expecting to participate in conventional crisis management. Instead, he had discovered innovative approaches to impossible problems, established new models for galactic cooperation, proven that diplomatic contact was possible with intelligences unlike anything previously known, and fallen in love with a princess whose courage and vision matched his own. Tomorrow, they would present their proposal for the long-term contact initiative to representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy. It would be the most ambitious cooperative project ever attempted, requiring sustained collaboration on a scale that exceeded even their recent rescue mission. But, tonight, as they worked together to refine their plans for changing the galaxy, Marcus knew that he had found something more valuable than any diplomatic achievement, a partner who shared his belief that any problem could be solved if you were willing to risk everything to find a solution. The entities had withdrawn to dark space, the inhabited systems were safe, and the galaxy had proved that cooperation could overcome any challenge. Now the real work could begin. 6 months after the successful contact mission, the Galactic Assembly Hall hummed with an energy that Marcus had never experienced before. Representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy had gathered not for crisis management, but for something unprecedented in galactic history, the formal establishment of the Interspecies Innovation Alliance. Marcus stood at the central podium, wearing the diplomatic insignia that now identified him as Ambassador-in-Chief for Human Zephyrian Cooperative Initiatives. Beside him, Princess Lyralii wore ceremonial robes that incorporated design elements from every participating civilization, symbolizing the unity they had built from diversity. Honored delegates, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's advanced acoustics. 6 months ago, we faced an extinction-level crisis that threatened billions of lives. Today, we gather to celebrate not just our survival, but the transformation of that crisis into the greatest opportunity in galactic history. The holographic display activated to show a real-time image of the long-term contact station, a massive construction project located at the edge of inhabited space. The station represented the combined technological capabilities of 47 different civilizations, designed specifically to support ongoing communication and cooperation with the entities they now called the Wanderers. Princess Lyralii stepped forward to address the assembly. The success of our initial contact mission proved that cooperation between different forms of intelligence is possible.
The ongoing development of our communication protocols has proven that such cooperation can be sustained and expanded. Today, we take the next step toward a future where the diversity of intelligence throughout the galaxy becomes our greatest strength rather than a source of conflict. Dr. Zenith's harmonic voice filled the chamber as he reported on the technical achievements of the past 6 months. Through careful analysis of the Wanderer's behavioral patterns and systematic development of symbol-based communication protocols, we have established basic information exchange capabilities. The Wanderers have demonstrated understanding of mathematical concepts, spatial relationships, and even abstract principles like cooperation and mutual benefit. Marcus felt a surge of pride as he remembered the countless hours he and Princess Lyralii had spent working with Dr. Zenith's team to develop communication methodologies that didn't rely on language or cultural context. It had been the most intellectually challenging project of his career, requiring them to think about concepts like truth, cooperation, and exchange in ways that could be understood by intelligences that processed information through completely different mechanisms. Admiral Kasvara provided the military perspective on their achievements. The Wanderers have shared basic technical information that has already enabled improvements in our propulsion systems and energy storage capabilities. In exchange, we have provided them with detailed star charts and resource distribution information that allows them to gather needed materials without approaching inhabited systems. The exchange of information had become regular and increasingly sophisticated as both sides developed better understanding of how to communicate across the vast differences in their cognitive processes. The Wanderers, Marcus had come to understand, thought in terms of patterns and flows that spanned galactic distances and geological timescales. Their approach to problem-solving involved considerations that human and most other galactic intelligences couldn't even conceptualize. But, somehow, through patient work and creative thinking, they had built bridges between those fundamentally different ways of understanding reality. Minister Veltania addressed the economic implications of their ongoing relationship with the Wanderers. The resource optimization techniques we've learned from the Wanderers have enabled us to reduce waste in manufacturing processes by an average of 37% across all participating civilizations. The energy efficiency improvements have made previously impossible infrastructure projects economically viable. Marcus activated the next section of the presentation, showing images of construction projects that were only possible because of Wanderer-inspired technologies. Orbital cities that could support billions of beings. Transportation networks that connected star systems separated by hundreds of light-years. Manufacturing facilities that could process raw materials at the molecular level with zero waste. But, the most significant achievement of the Long-Term Contact Initiative, Princess Lyralii said, her voice carrying the warmth that Marcus had come to love, isn't technological. It's the proof that intelligence, regardless of its form or origin, can recognize and respond to genuine offers of friendship. The assembly erupted in approval as delegates from dozens of civilizations expressed their support for expanding the Contact Initiative even further. Over the past 6 months, the success of their relationship with the Wanderers had inspired similar approaches to contact with other unknown intelligences detected throughout the galaxy. As the formal presentation concluded and delegates moved into smaller discussion groups to address implementation details, Marcus found himself standing with Princess Lyralii on one of the observation platforms that offered a view of the galaxy's core regions. "You know," he said, watching the streams of ships moving between star systems in patterns that had become significantly more efficient thanks to Wanderer-inspired navigation techniques, "when I accepted the assignment to assist with your diplomatic crisis, I thought I was participating in conventional crisis management." Princess Lyralii moved closer to him, her hand finding his as they watched the evidence of transformed galactic civilization spreading across the viewports. "When I requested Earth's assistance," she replied, "I thought I was asking for help with an impossible military situation. I never imagined we would end up redesigning the fundamental principles of interstellar cooperation." Marcus turned to look at her, still amazed by how her presence could make him feel simultaneously more capable and more vulnerable than he had ever felt before. "Any regrets?" "About revolutionizing galactic diplomacy, establishing sustainable contact with beings from beyond known space, or falling in love with a human ambassador who thinks impossible solutions are just problems that require creative thinking? Any or all of the above." Princess Lyralii laughed, the musical sound that had become Marcus's favorite reminder that their relationship transcended every conventional boundary between species and cultures. Marcus Chen, she said, using the formal tone she employed for official pronouncements while her eyes sparkled with affection, you have systematically challenged every assumption I held about leadership, problem-solving, and what constitutes a reasonable risk. You have convinced me to bet my empire, my life, and my heart on theories that most advisors would have dismissed as impossible. She paused, her expression shifting to something more serious. And, in doing so, you have given me the most rewarding partnership, both professional and personal, that I could have imagined. So no, Ambassador Chen, I have no regrets whatsoever. Marcus felt the same warmth he had experienced during their first successful contact with the Wanderers, the satisfaction of achieving something that everyone had said was impossible. Lyralii, he said, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. Yes? Marcus reached into his formal jacket and withdrew a small object that had been crafted by artisans from 7 different worlds, incorporating materials that the Wanderers had shared as gifts to commemorate their successful communication. Princess Lyralii Zarthane, he said, dropping to one knee in the traditional human gesture of proposal while adapting it to incorporate the Zephyrian hand positions that indicated lifelong commitment, would you consider expanding our partnership to include the most permanent form of cooperation that our respective species recognize? Princess Lyralii stared at the engagement artifact in shock, her 4 hands moving in the traditional Zephyrian gestures that indicated overwhelming joy. Marcus, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that he had learned indicated deep emotional response, are you proposing marriage between a human ambassador and a Zephyrian princess? Do you realize that would be the first interspecies marriage between our civilizations? I'm proposing marriage between 2 beings who have discovered that the most worthwhile achievements come from attempting things that have never been done before, Marcus replied. The fact that it would also be the first interspecies marriage between our civilizations just makes it consistent with everything else we've accomplished together. Princess Lyralii's response was to accept the engagement artifact and, then, lift Marcus from his kneeling position so she could kiss him with the passion of someone who had learned that love, like diplomacy, was most successful when it transcended every conventional boundary.